She's an SLP into feeding, pediatric feeding practices and sensory integration certified. So we conducted a poll, and based on that, we have queries from parents, which I'll leave up to Chitra to answer. So we'll start with the questions, Chitra.
Thank you for the introduction.
It's a pleasure, Chitra. So we'll talk about how will a new parent know what exactly is picky eating, Chitra?
Well, picky eating comes in various forms. One is when a child doesn't want to eat certain textures, doesn't want to taste certain food because of the way it smells, because of the way it looks like, or if the parent has force fed because of their interest in their child eating adequate quantities according to the parent. These things will result in a dislike among children towards certain food or eating at large. I've seen all of this. Some kids dislike a certain food because they had a negative experience around that food. There are children who totally dislike feeding because of the anxiety and stress that they associate to eating at large. So these kids become picky to eat food. They become very choosy about food, which is what is often termed commonly as picky eating. But I would also like to highlight that there are other children with the diagnosis of autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, and other medical conditions who also have difficulties in choosing textures, accepting new tastes, accepting the smells of food. That comes because of an underlying sensory difference in children. So in typically developing children is what we first spoke about. I followed it up with other children who have different diagnoses and different medical conditions, which can also result in picky eating.
Understood. That defines it really well, Chitra. I mean, categorizing into two parts and then summarizing what exactly it is. So what are some of the common, feeding difficulties that you observe and you have been observing in children these days?
Yes. So when children look at food, right at the sight of it, they say no. Yeah. When there is a meal time, around that meal time, they feel dysregulated, overwhelmed, anxious. They give reasons why they don't want to sit at the meal table. They say they want to use the washroom when they're about to eat. They want to stretch themselves up while eating. They throw food. They gag at the sight of food, or they choke while eating, or gag when they are eating. All these are some of the common symptoms that you will observe when a child is not okay with eating.
Okay. So we have to monitor these because, the social media, the way it's coming up, the way gagging is coming up, it's important for us to understand that after a certain period of time, if you see your child gagging, with not adjusting with textures and, so we have to take care of. That's what I understand, right?
That's right. You don't have to necessarily just a one gag and then you're like, okay, my child is a picky eater, I need to meet a specialist. That's not necessary. But if the child is repeatedly gagging at the sight of food, or after taking 10 morsels of food or 5 morsels of food, the child is showing you a sign of gagging, to actually tell you, I'm not able to. That's their way of doing it. Or if the child is saying, my stomach is aching during meal time, these are all signs that the child is stressed out at meal times.
Okay.
Result in picky eating. These are also symptoms that we see commonly.
Okay. And the recent surveys have come up, saying that post-pandemic, and there has been a rise in the number of, cases we see with, these difficulties. Do you observe them as well?
Absolutely. There are quite a lot of children who are brought to the clinic with difficulties in terms of tolerating food textures. We also see kids brought to the clinic quite often than before with, signs of autism. These are common conditions that I've seen has increased during the last few years, especially after the pandemic.
After the pandemic. So when we say after the pandemic, anything specifically that you've been observing, Chitra, what is the reason behind this after this pandemic? Yeah,
there are quite a lot of reasons, and I would like to highlight 2 of them. One of it is children lacked a rich sensory exposure, experience, being outdoor, playing in the sand, playing on the slide, playing with other children, meeting people, interacting moving around. And because they did not have this exposure where there is a lot of touch and feel, they touch the sand, they feel the sand, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the examples. But like this, we have multiple aspects to consider when we talk about sensory rich environments where they get to go to a school environment, they're opening the zip, opening a bag, they're picking a notebook, they're putting things back in place. There's movement, there's walking, climbing up steps, playing around with friends, holding hands with each other, wearing shoes, wearing socks, walking on different textured platforms, right? There's up and down on a unlevel ground, level ground, grass.
Understood.
All of these things our children have missed out.
So
That's
can we relate it with sensory stimulation when we say that, missed sensory exploration? So is it very similar to sensory stimulation that, yeah, they need some kind of stimulation to keep them active and keep them, as per what we expect them to be?
Yeah. So this is one of the first most common things that I would like to highlight, what could have happened during a pandemic. Now, sensory stimulation is the sensory input we give the child.
Yeah.
We'll come to that. The first one is sensory exposure. Children lack that sensory exposure, which could have resulted in them having limited sensory experiences that can also cause difficulties with eating. And the other major reason that I would like to cite now, which is critical, is excessive screen exposure. Because children didn't have a way of going out and playing, that's number one. The number two follows excessive screen exposure. And because kids had an exposure to screen time, we have kids who got screen exposure of 8-9 hours a day. Literally every single waking hour they have been in front of the screen. That means they're eating food in front of the screen, they are doing whatever they're doing right in front of the screen, either the phone or the iPad or the TV or all three. And when this happens, the child's visual sensory system, auditory sensory system, these two systems are highly stimulated.
Okay.
They're exposed to these two stimuli a lot more than tactile, which is touch, proprioception, which is the deep pressure that we feel in our muscles, joints. When we move, we don't look where we are moving, but we know we are moving, right? Now, these sensory experiences are missed out during the pandemic while engaging a lot of time in front of the screens. And also, they miss out on the movement by and large. A lot of vestibular input to do with movement is missed out. I'm highlighting these three sensory systems because they are very critical in a child's formative years. Does not mean that I'm overlooking the other systems, but since it's a short video and we would like to keep information concise, I would like to highlight these points. And when the children miss out on these aspects, the tactile is to do with the touch. They're watching TV and eating. They don't know what they're eating. It's like literally the autopilot mode is on.
Exactly.
They just take food and they just don't even chew it adequately. They munch it a few times and swallow. Many kids don't even know what's the difference between 2 to 3 different types of food.
Exactly. That's what we call that. It suppresses your bodily, response. It suppresses your brain to, it's okay. Whatever it's there on the plate, it's okay to eat that. They don't even understand what's being served to them. The taste, everything just goes in vain. That's completely true.
That's right. And all of a sudden, when the screen is removed, now the child feels everything is new.
Yeah.
It's like you go to Japan. I always give this example. Their most favorite food there probably is sushi.
Yeah.
And my son is a fan of all the Japanese animes, etc. And we took him to a Japanese restaurant, but he couldn't eat the sushi platter he ordered. He was longing to have it. Why? Because he's not exposed to it. The food in itself is good, and that's a delicacy in Japan, but that's not a delicacy in India, and we're not familiar to that type of food. We're more comfortable with biryani and all the kind of food that we get in India, and that's a delicacy for us. It's not to do with the food, but because we did not have a prior exposure to it, we've not developed an affinity for that food. Likewise, all of a sudden, when the screen is removed, when our kids look at the food, it's something new to them and they don't have an affinity for it, and it tastes like, I can't take it. This is too much.
Exactly. That's what happens when we talk about food neophobia, that something comes, it happens with us as well. It happens as adults as well.
Yes.
So that's very, I mean, that's very, it's something that we have to take care of. Yeah, that happens. So obviously with pandemic, the exposure of screen time, it already led to a lot of issues. And I often get messages from parents that, especially from the working parents, that at home, the child is fed with screens, and many parents do not encourage responsive feeding, just sitting with a fixed quantity, so that they know that, okay, they have eaten this amount of food. So that makes them, rely on, okay, this is what the child needs. But it's also important to understand their hunger and fullness cues as well, which is very important. And from my end, I feel screen time ruins it all. You don't even get to know that, okay, I'm hungry, I'm full. It's just that the time you stop, letting them watch screen, it's okay. They'll stop eating. And that's the biggest concern that we get to know from, parents as well. So what's your take on this, Chitra? How would you help parents to tackle such situations? What should we do?
For a majority of kids, when they are so used to eating with screens, and that's become a norm for them, all of a sudden to remove screen would be like literally asking someone to walk without support. Somebody who's had an accident and they are using supports to walk, crutches to walk. It's like literally taking the crutches off and say, walk by yourself. Yeah. That's exactly what happens when we just randomly take off screens and tell kids to eat without screens. There have been some parents who successfully implemented it as well, but it could be very hard for children. And what I recommend parents to do is remove screen, not overnight, but start with the child's favorite meal. Okay, it can be just that one meal a week. If it's noodles, it's noodles. At that time, you can't debate, oh, I don't want to give unhealthy food, etc. It's a child's favorite food. That's all matters now, because we want to remove a greater negative impact that the child is having because of excessive screen time. So you remove one meal. I mean, you give one meal a week without the screen. Okay. And when that is consistent for 2 to 3 weeks, then you start working on 2 meals a week. And then you start working on every day, a single meal will be done without screens.
That's interesting.
You start with 1 meal a week, and eventually it moves on 1 meal a day, and then 2 meals a day, and lastly, all 3 meals a day. And one of the best ways to support this is eat together as a family.
Exactly. Family eating.
And have positive conversations, not about the food.
About anything. I would say about anything. I mean, people often come, what would we talk with a 7-month-old and an 8-month-old? It's like just spending some good time together, communicating with them. It has other advantages as well. So that's what we can do. And what would you like to convey from your end, Chitra, to the parents, especially of picky eaters and who have been, struggling to handle them? What would be your one thing that you would recommend to them?
Yeah, children need connection. And when parents and children have that deep bonding and connection, a major part of all the chaos around mealtimes is sorted. And in order for you to get that connection, that screen time has to go. Yeah. But with some kids, yes, I understand it's difficult, which is why I gave few recommendations how to deal with that. But for parents who are not able to do the connection during meal times because the child is already exposed to excessive screens, have this connection before the meal time. Have some hugs, have some cuddles, and then get to set the meal table together. You're eating on the floor, fine. Put the food together where you all sit and eat, serve each other, you start somewhere to build this connection between the parent and the child. If there is one thing that I have to say, that's the one thing that I would say. But I also have 3 to 4 other suggestions. If we can discuss more, I would also recommend that before a meal, always have the child involved in cooking together.
Yeah.
Includes chopping together, maybe smashing something together, or using a vegetable cutter to get different shapes of that food together. Start with that. And when you're cooking, actually involve the child in getting to transfer, cut potatoes, for example, into the pan and fry it. It depends on their age. Now you can't do this with an
Yeah.
8-month-old, but you definitely can do this with a 4 or a 5-year-old under parental guidance. When you have these kind of practices where you are involved in food preparation, the child who is not familiar to that food is now seeing, processing, smelling, touching, experiencing, and he's getting familiar with the food. So what happens? Instead of food controlling the child is controlling the food, and there is autonomy. And when children have autonomy, they feel safe and they're ready to explore. So if you can follow 2 tips, in fact, one is set the meal table, the other is be involved in food preparation. Food preparation is miraculous. You will see big differences.
And we can also work on it for those who are like parents who are working and are not available at home. We can try once or twice a week to begin with and let the other help or the nannies work on it. This is one of the things that came up from parents, that we are not available. How do we indulge in these activities?
Mm-hmm.
Just be, once a week and twice a week, and then they can, making it more intense and more indulging for them.
Absolutely. And it's not just working parents. I see this even among parents who are not working and full time at home. I still see that they struggle during meal times to feed the child without a screen. Because even when some families are feeding the child without the screens, they are encouraged to do so by their relatives, their parents, their friends.
Try,
And even though they're not practicing it, because of peer pressure and people around them asking them to do so, they start doing that.
I understand. Yeah. So probably that's all we had for today. It was very interesting. Hope this will at least help parents to, deal with this issue, which is, I hope it gets over soon and parents are able to deal with it very nicely now. So thank you, Chitra. Thank you for this wonderful session. It was really informative, and we'll have more such sessions together. So thank you. Have a good day, Chitra.